Okay, good afternoon. Hello, folks. Welcome to the Red Zone. Today, I'll share the application of an external module called the MGB Random Number Generator, or the MGB Random Number Action Tag version 0.5 for RedCap, excuse me. Um, this is coming out of MGB, another one coming out of MGB, and developed originally coded by David Clark, I'd like to point out, and the team, including David by David Heskett. Some release notes. We have the most recent, actually, so we have minor updates. It wasn't necessarily really um, any type of large updates other than in version 1.04 and 3. And for our operation, this is coming out of the configuration documentation. In example one, in the configuration documentation, we show that we can generate a random number in a text field using a default configuration from 1 to 0. And for this example one, we have two methods of applying the syntax. So we can use either the action tag that is added to your project once the external module is enabled. One has the parentheses and the other does not. But the default remains the same between 1 and 100 specifically. And the second example, you have the ability to use a range, a specified range. So the example given is 101 to 110. And importantly, the notes that they have added here are avoid adding the spaces. And what they mean by that is in between your parentheses or even in between your comma and your numeric values. Um, and then you can also include a min and max to be equal to each other so that that value would occur every time, almost like a set value, so to speak. So for licensing, I won't get into that, but we have here some examples and I ran some exercises. And what we have is for the first one, in example one, I'm pulling from specifically our two action tags. And we'll look at it. I'll run a autofill and we can see that random numbers are generated, although it's hard to depict that when we have the autofill. Here we see that we have some text that's being applied. Um, that wasn't expected. So I've tested and tested, and that's the first time that's occurred. But nevertheless, I'll keep pushing forward. There is a value here that's being piped in. For example, I'm just going to go ahead and go into the project, and then we'll look at the record status dashboard, and we'll add a new record. Um, Actually, let me just back up a bit because I just want to mention about the configuration that it's pretty straightforward in that we access it the same way. We click on our external modules manage link to access external modules project module manager, and then we click on our enable. And since I already have it enabled here, nothing will occur, but we click on our enable. And then from here, we'll go ahead and type in our available modules. We'll run our search. You can copy and paste your respectively the name being action tag, MGB action, random number action tag version 1.0.5. And since it's already enabled, it didn't appear, but this is what it is. So, and then in our configuration, once enabled, you can opt to hide the module from non-admins in your project. in the list of enabled modules for the project checkbox. So I'll cancel out of that, and then we'll go back to our survey. And I just want to reload this and see if that'll correct the issue. So, okay. So we have in example one, we're looking at a field type. We're using the convention of a text box. This text box is set to, and I'm using the first one with the parentheses in this. This one is set to the default configuration, including for, I added a foundation September, and then I'm using a min of 1 and a max of 100. And so our value came out as 19. And in the additional example one here, we have again, I'm using the same configuration in our field type. The only difference is for our validation, I excluded the none, or excuse me, I excluded the min and max to determine whether it was required in our field if we're using the action tag. Since the action tag already calls for that information, I wanted to see if it would work equally. And we can see that it actually did. So if we go into the project, um, we look at we look at our form, and the second example is the text box 2. And we have, I'll just open that up. So what we have here, I'm referring to our minimum, maximum. I'm referring to these parameters here, and I left them blank and rather as none. And then here I'm using using our generic action tag. One thing to point out is that there's two, but for some reason they're the same. So um, when added, we will see the MGB random number, and then it has this appends the document convenient as well, and then some generic instructions, and then it's also here at the bottom again. So it's duplicated, although when used, I'm going to go ahead and click both of those, so we'll see. So we can see that in effect. So in effect, these are the ones that were added afterwards, these two here. So I'm just going to delete them. So it actually doesn't add in the parentheses for you. Um, so in any event, the action tag will work similarly or the same. So let's go ahead and save that and then go back to the survey. So here we have the second example. I'm pushing over to the since it's a text field, a paragraph text can be that. I just thought maybe like, for example, if you had like a long string of binary data and you wanted to see it within a box altogether, depending on how many characters and so forth. I'm not sure. For example, in Excel, one cell will contain, it used to be 30,000 characters, and then um, RedCap tends to follow that, I think. So not exactly sure between a text box and a notes box as to the number. The the next one, I'm using a multiple choice drop down. And so we can argue, okay, well, so what is considered text in RedCap? So this is actually working. Um, it pulled a number. I'm piping it in here. This is being used with the generator. And I'll show you that as well here within the project. So if we go over to the project and we look at, let's see, I'm saying, since we don't have a validation per se, it isn't applied. So we don't have that validation here. So that's the scary part of it. But then you have what I did was I used 1 through 100 for our example, and it worked out. So I discovered that that actually works. And if we go into a radio, what's interesting about this radio button is that um, it does not have a parameter min max setting for us, but I did the same thing, 1 through 100. Although it doesn't automatically populate the radio button, but it does generate the numbers. So we have 100, and if we can see here, once I autofill it, it'll follow suit. It'll be 100. And the next one here, we're looking at a slider, and this also works. It captures a value, uh, and I'm just going to copy that so we can see the value. Well, anyway, we can see that it's uh, 308 and 1. So the thing with this slider is that this doesn't this doesn't work in conjunction with that parameter. So that's not a useful, I wouldn't think that would be a useful use. But just to kind of gauge and get familiar with what the external module is doing, um, I added these fields, even though the configuration says otherwise. But we're going to go ahead and submit. No, actually, we'll go to the, come back up here to our next example. And so for our next example, we're going to go ahead and use our parameters, or our 101 to 110 specified range. And so here, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and reset that actually again. And I think that matters with the radio button. When I use the radio button, it makes a difference. So we're going into example 2, and here we see that it did work. We have 106, so it falls within our required parameters equally here. And so I'm using the same convention. I'm using the text box. I'm using min max here. So 101, 110, and here's our value. The validation is set to a number. In example 2, I did the same thing. I'm removing the min max, but we still get our value. Well, that's actually wrong. I think what I did was I'm having the pipe value from here come in, so I missed that. So uh this is our next example, and so this I had trouble with because I don't think it accepts it. So we have a text box, and I'm using a 1 decimal. I applied the validation set to a number. It's from 1 to 100. We can take a look at the project, and it's 2. And we're looking at our range, our specified range with decimals. So here I'm using 0 and 9.0 with 1 decimal, still a number, right? And so when we look at it, um, we can see that it's not actually pulling in a value here. So we have 1.0 and 9.0. And so using a decimal will not work as far as I've been able to discover here. So I didn't try any of the other ones, any of the other options. So what I'm going to do is cancel out of that, go back into our survey, and I'll go back into our, I want to reload. And here we have, well, so how do we test this? So for example, if we're gonna test this, this is the first thing that came to mind was a 2x2 table. I don't want to get into the statistical part of that, but this is just generic. And also, I was just working with the numbers. And what we have here is The calculations are fine. The parameters are set. Everything is okay, I believe. Um, so usually with a diagnostic type test, we can use a 2 by 2 table theoretically to determine the accuracy of determination. And we can look at, for example, the sensitivity, positive predictive values, specificity, negative predictive values, so forth. And what we have here, what I'm doing is I'm adding in following the quadrant one and quadrant two. Those are summed. And then what we do is we take that and divide it by A. So it's A divided by A plus C. We see that in parentheses. And is coming downward, and the convention is typically the same in most 2 by 2 tables that I've seen um, for how it's configured, being true positive, like for example, false negative or type 2 error, and then we have false positive, type 1, uh, true negative, so T there. So prevalence is um, the determination of depending on how you're going to make your decision based off of the outcome. Um, I'm not going to say negative or positive either way, but this is sensitivity and specificity are added across, and we should have the same value. These are added across here, and these are added across here, and then we add down, and they should be similar values here, and the total should equal um, in either direction. So for the next exercise that I tried, I said, well, okay, so this is a little more complicated to extract that type of information. So for example, if I go back into the project and I'm looking at the dispersion of the data, and I'm looking at, for example, let's see if I go into my prevalence and I view, we can see these are the data points that I have existing in the project. Here's a line chart, and I'm plotting sensitivity versus specificity here. And here are some just general statistics, generic statistics for it from the project and the data that was collected. So during testing. So I have 45 tests, and let's take a look here. I'm going to go into our data reports, exports, and stats. And then here, is it a fair coin? So for example, I thought about a coin flip. So for example, you have the probability of getting a head or a tail, heads or tails on the flip. So by convention, it's basically 50%. But what's a true fair coin? So for example, if one side's weighted more by the embossment, if that's how you say it, if it's embossed and it has more metal on one side, there's going to be a little difference in weight. So what's a true fair coin as we know it? So what the way that we look at that is that with the more trials that occur as we get into more trials, this should level off and it should become more of a normal type of distribution, and we can get closer to these values. So what we did here is we're going to um, reset that. So um, here we have Gene Hackman throwing a flip. There is a pseudo random generator or random number generator that we have here. So for example, if we look at the widget, I say I want one flip and flip the coin. It'll display our value. So we have 50-50 chance of getting heads or tails. Okay, so if we say 1,000 and flip the coin, so now we're closer to our 1.5 and 48.5% in heads or tails. And if we take a look at, we take a, for example, Open up some dashboards. Oops, oh, excuse me. So we'll add a record and um, current value razor fields. So for this, automatically it seems to be that the random generator automatically the action tag actually adds the value to the project. Um, and if we look at, for example, I think it's because there's data, but nevertheless, some other answer. I did some errors within the testing, and so the errors were pretty typical throughout. That the min is empty for the field. So I will say that the validation, including the parameters, need to be set. And it's not just, I want to re-emphasize not just that you have to add the action tag with the parameters and your min max, but you add that into your validation as well. Um, for the most part, think I think that covers everything other than one other thing I wanted to mention is that the one designer, and we look at the some of the fields that I have set up here. Interestingly, I used a zero and so zero as a minimum and one as a maximum, where we don't get that same type of effect as a coin flip. But if we use zero as a min and one as a max, um, that for some reason didn't actually display or function correctly. Um, I set that. Let's see here. This is um, integers. Okay, so integers do work. So we have the ability to um, use an integer and use a negative and a as your min, and then um, a regular value as your max, and follow suit here. So an integer will work for this, will work along in conjunction with your action. Other than that, I think that's the bulk of what this random generator. And is there any questions?